My name's Lily, I'm 32 years old, and last month at my own brother's wedding, they sat me in the kitchen like I didn't even belong there. I wasn't just a guest. I was the one who made that wedding possible. That day, something inside me snapped. And what I did next? Well, let's just say they'll never forget it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more family drama and stories of courage. I can still hear the faint squeak of my heels as I walked into the reception hall that morning, clutching my small purse a little tighter than usual. Weddings are supposed to be warm, joyous occasions, moments where family comes together, laughs, and maybe even cries happy tears. But as I stepped inside, a familiar weight pressed down on my chest, the kind of heaviness that comes when you're hoping for something better, but already expecting the same old story. The first thing I noticed was how the staff treated me. Not rudely, not unkindly, but differently. They knew me, not just as the bride's sister-in-law or the groom's sister, but as the owner of the catering company that had spent weeks preparing every plate of food for this wedding. Some of them gave me quick nods of recognition, others small smiles of respect. And yet, when I looked for my family, their eyes slid right past me, as if I were just another hired hand. "Lily, you made it," my cousin Amanda called, her voice sugary sweet but her eyes darting to the woman next to her, already moving on. I forced a smile, the kind you plaster on when you know it doesn't matter if it reaches your eyes or not. That smile faltered the moment I spotted the long tables draped in white linens. Each seat bore a delicate name card, calligraphy looping across cream cardstock. I moved slowly down the aisle of tables, scanning for mine. My brother's college buddies, our childhood neighbors, even distant relatives I hadn't seen in years had their names neatly placed in prominent spots. But not me. I circled the tables twice, my heart thumping louder with every step. Maybe it was an oversight. Maybe my card had slipped under another, or maybe it had been misplaced in the rush. But deep down I knew better. "Excuse me," I asked one of the young ushers arranging glasses. "Could you tell me where my seat is?" He glanced at his clipboard, finger running down the list. "Lily Carter?" he asked cautiously. I nodded. "Right this way," he said, motioning me to follow. We walked past the beautifully decorated hall, past the family tables adorned with extra flowers, and into a side hallway that smelled faintly of dish soap and garlic. The laughter and music from the main room faded as the hum of industrial refrigerators grew louder. He pushed open a swinging door and gestured inside. "There you go," he said quickly, then disappeared before I could even respond. My eyes adjusted to the harsh fluorescent light. The kitchen buzzed with motion. Chefs shouting orders, pans clanging, servers weaving in and out with trays balanced high. And there, in the corner, was a small table shoved against the wall. A single folding chair waited. A name card placed neatly on the surface. "Lily Carter." For a second, I thought I might laugh. Maybe this was a joke, some twisted prank that would end with someone jumping out and shouting, "Gotcha!" But no one came. The truth sat in front of me as stark as that lonely chair. My chest tightened, the air catching in my throat. Memories flashed, uninvited but sharp. Birthday parties where my brother blew out candles on cakes I'd baked but never got thanked for. Christmas mornings when my gifts were overlooked while his were praised. Family dinners where I was the one clearing plates while he basked in applause. And now here I was, at his wedding, once again shoved into the background. Only this time it wasn't subtle. It was blatant. I slid into the chair, the cold metal pressing against my legs, and tried to steady my breathing. From the crack in the swinging door, I could glimpse the glittering chandeliers, hear the applause as the newlyweds entered to the sound of clinking glasses. My eyes burned, but I blinked the sting away. I wouldn't cry here, not in front of strangers who already saw enough. One of the servers paused near me, her tray loaded with champagne flutes. She glanced at the name card, then at me. "They really sat you here?" she asked, disbelief etched in her face. I forced a laugh, though it came out hollow. "Yeah, guess this is my place." She shook her head. "That's not right. Not for family." Her words hit harder than she knew. Not for family. But that was the problem, wasn't it? To my brother, to my parents, maybe I wasn't truly family, not in the way that counted. I was useful, reliable, The invisible sibling who handled things quietly in the background so the spotlight could stay firmly where they wanted it. On him. A wave of voices carried into the kitchen as the reception picked up. Toasts were being made, jokes exchanged, laughter echoing like distant bells. Every burst of applause felt like a nail being driven deeper into the wall between me and them. I reached for the glass of water that had been set at my lonely table, and took a slow sip, the coolness grounding me. But grounding only goes so far when humiliation sits heavy in your stomach. At that moment, I thought about leaving. Just standing up, walking out the back door, and never looking back. But another part of me, the part that had stayed quiet for years, whispered something different. Stay. Watch. Remember. So I stayed. I sat in that kitchen chair, surrounded by clanging pots and hurried footsteps, as though I were nothing more than part of the furniture. And as I listened to the muffled cheer of my brother's perfect day, a strange calm began to settle over me. Because deep down, I knew something was shifting. For years, I'd accepted invisibility. For years, I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But sitting there, tucked away like an afterthought at the very event my company had made possible, I realized something simple and undeniable. This wasn't about oversight. This wasn't about a mistake. This was deliberate. And if they thought I'd stay quiet forever, they were about to be very, very wrong. As I sat in that lonely kitchen chair, the hum of refrigerators and the clatter of pans faded into the background, replaced by the quiet echo of old memories. It was as if that single humiliating seat had opened a door I'd been keeping locked for years, and every forgotten moment began slipping through the cracks, demanding to be seen. The first memory that surfaced wasn't even dramatic. It was small, almost trivial, yet it carried the sting of something I'd never shaken. I was 7 years old, standing in the backyard during my birthday party. The cake had my name on it, pink icing letters that I had begged for weeks to have. But when it came time to light the candles, my brother, 3 years older and already the family's golden boy, pushed his way to the front. Everyone laughed as he blew out my candles before I even had the chance. My parents clapped, snapping pictures of him, not me. That day, I smiled for the camera, but inside I felt invisible. It didn't stop there. Childhood was filled with moments where I became the background character in my own life. When my brother scored a goal at his soccer game, the family cheered so loudly it seemed like the entire neighborhood could hear. When I came home with an art project I'd worked on for weeks, it barely made it onto the fridge before being covered by another flyer for his next match. Even as a kid, I noticed the pattern. He was celebrated for simply showing up, while I had to fight just to be acknowledged. I remember one afternoon in elementary school when I brought home a perfect spelling test. Every word marked right, a shiny gold star on top. I placed it on the kitchen counter, waiting for someone to notice. Hours passed. Dinner came and went. Nobody said a word. Meanwhile, my brother burst in later that evening, announcing he'd been picked for the starting lineup on his team, and the room erupted like he'd won the lottery. Sitting there in that kitchen decades later, I realized how deeply those moments had etched themselves into me. I had grown up learning to accept less. Less praise, less attention, less space. And somehow, I had carried that lesson into adulthood without even realizing it. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the muffled laughter spilling from the reception hall. Another memory surfaced, this one from high school. Junior prom. I had spent weeks saving for a simple blue dress, nothing extravagant, just something that made me feel pretty. When the night came, I remember twirling in front of the mirror, my heart fluttering with anticipation. But when I stepped out into the living room to show my parents, they barely glanced at me. My mother's eyes went straight to my brother's tux, beaming with pride as though he were the star of the night. I stood there, cheeks burning, holding on to my moment as it dissolved in the air. That feeling of being overshadowed haunted me through every milestone. At my high school graduation, I walked the stage, diploma in hand, searching the crowd for a familiar face. My parents clapped politely, but their excitement didn't swell until my brother joined me afterward, joking with his friends. He wasn't even graduating that day, yet somehow, he still managed to steal the spotlight. College wasn't much different. I worked tirelessly to put myself through school, juggling part-time jobs and endless study sessions. When I finally walked across that stage years later, The applause felt hollow. At the family dinner afterward, the conversation quickly shifted to my brother's plans for the future, as though my achievement had been nothing more than a footnote. As these memories washed over me, I realized it wasn't just the big milestones I remembered. It was the quiet, everyday moments that stung the most. Like the time I spent all night sewing a costume for the school play because my brother had forgotten, only for him to take credit when the teacher complimented it. Or the endless nights when I did the dishes, helped with homework, and picked up the pieces of everyone else's messes, never once being thanked, only expected. Even friendships weren't immune to his shadow. In high school, one of my closest friends developed a crush on him. She spent weeks asking me to set them up, her attention slowly drifting away from me, until I was just a stepping stone to get closer to him. That betrayal cut deeply, not because she liked him, but because I realized even my friendships could be swallowed by his presence. The older I got, the more invisible I became. At family gatherings, people would ask me how my brother was doing before they even asked about me. At holidays, my parents would gush about his career, his relationships, his future, while I sat quietly at the table, carving turkey or passing plates. It was as if I had been cast in a permanent role, the supporting act in his never-ending show. But the memory that hurt the most was one I had buried for years. My father had once taken me aside after a heated family argument. I was maybe 16. I had finally snapped, asking why nobody ever noticed me, why I was always the one cleaning up, staying quiet, making sacrifices. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Lily, not everyone can be the star. Some people are just better in the background." I never forgot those words. They became the quiet drumbeat of my life, echoing in moments I wanted to stand tall, but forced myself to shrink. Now, sitting in the kitchen of my brother's wedding, I felt those words pounding in my ears all over again. But this time, something inside me shifted. I wasn't 16 anymore. I wasn't the girl desperate for a sliver of attention or recognition. I was a grown woman who had built her own business, created her own path, and made sacrifices nobody had ever acknowledged. And yet here I was shoved back into the background once more. One of the servers walked by, balancing a tray of appetizers, and gave me a small nod of sympathy. It was strange. These strangers, the staff, the ones technically working for me, seemed to see me more clearly than my own family ever had. That realization burned like fire in my chest. For the first time in a long time, I didn't just feel invisible, I felt angry. Not the kind of anger that makes you shout or slam doors, but the quiet, simmering kind. The kind that grows out of years of being overlooked, dismissed, and shoved aside until the very thought of it becomes unbearable. And in that anger, something unexpected bloomed, clarity. Because if my family had always seen me as the invisible sibling, maybe it was time I finally showed them just how visible I could be. The anger that had been simmering inside me slowly tightened into something sharper, as I shifted in that uncomfortable folding chair. The clinking of glasses and the roar of laughter spilling in through the swinging doors reminded me of where I wasn't wanted. I stared at the name card in front of me, my name written neatly in scripted ink. And for the first time in my life, it didn't just feel like a slight, it felt like a statement. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't about space, or some last-minute shuffle. No, this was deliberate. I adjusted the strap of my purse and leaned back, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Around me, the kitchen bustled with life. Chefs calling orders, servers balancing trays, dishwashers scrubbing furiously. But even here, surrounded by chaos, I couldn't ignore the throb in my chest. It was like every memory I had just replayed inside my head had come to a single, undeniable conclusion. I wasn't family. At least, not in their eyes. The door swung open again, and through the narrow space, I saw a flash of chandeliers and my brother standing tall, arm around his new bride, as they soaked up applause. His smile was wide, his shoulders proud. For a moment, I caught his eyes. Just for a second. And I swear, he smirked. That look sent a shiver down my spine. It was the kind of smirk that said he knew exactly where I was. That this wasn't a mistake, it was intentional. A quiet, cruel way of putting me in my place. My jaw tightened, and I curled my fingers against the edge of the table. I thought of all the hours my staff and I had put into preparing this menu. Every tasting, every adjustment, every sleepless night spent ensuring perfection. My company wasn't just the caterer. We were the backbone of this wedding. And yet, here I sat, shoved into a corner like I didn't even belong. A young server carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres paused near me. "You sure you're okay sitting here?" she asked gently, lowering her voice as though she knew she was stepping into something delicate. "I'll manage," I replied, my words steadier than I felt. She gave me a sympathetic look before moving on, and I followed her with my eyes. Each tray she carried out was filled with food I had approved, recipes I had perfected. The realization made me clench my teeth. They were out there celebrating on my labor, my effort, my success. And in return, they had given me a seat by the dish pit. The more I thought about it, the heavier it felt. And then, like a spark, the thought turned into something else. A refusal. I stood, pushing the chair back, the scrape of metal against the tiled floor catching the attention of one of the cooks. He glanced at me, then quickly looked away, as though sensing my mood. I didn't care. I walked toward the swinging door, and for a moment, I hovered there, peering through the crack. The reception was alive with chatter and glitter, people raising glasses, plates clinking. My brother leaned in to whisper something into his bride's ear, and she laughed delicately, brushing his arm with a perfect practiced grace. And me? I was the ghost in the kitchen. The thought stung worse than I expected, and I pulled back into the fluorescent light. My chest ached, but this wasn't sadness anymore. It was a heat, a sharpness. Something was unraveling inside me, and I couldn't hold it in much longer. I sat back down at my lonely table, trying to collect myself. My hands shook as I reached for the water glass. The cool liquid steadied me, but it didn't calm the storm. Then something small happened, almost insignificant, yet it tipped me further. One of the busboys, barely out of high school, walked past carrying a bin of dirty dishes. As he set it down near the sink, he muttered under his breath, "That's messed up. They really got you eating back here." He didn't mean for me to hear it, but I did. And that simple acknowledgement, from someone who barely knew me, hit me harder than I expected. Because he saw it. He recognized it. A stranger could see my humiliation clearer than my own family. That was when the decision began to form. Not a wild impulse, not a rash outburst, but a steady, deliberate choice. Still, I didn't act yet. I sat in silence, watching the kitchen move, listening to the muffled music from the other room. I let the weight of every slight, every insult, every invisible moment press down until my chest felt heavy. And then I whispered to myself, so soft I barely heard it, "Not anymore." At that moment, the door swung open again, and a family friend, Mrs. Henderson, a woman who had known us since childhood, peeked her head in. She looked flustered. "Lily, dear, what are you doing back here? Everyone's asking where you are." I blinked at her. Everyone? No, not everyone. Maybe a few people who had suddenly realized my absence. Maybe the ones who wanted to save face. "They put me here," I said flatly, gesturing to the table. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted in shock. "In the kitchen? That can't be right. Surely it's a mistake." I gave a short laugh, sharp and bitter. "No mistake." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She wrung her hands, then muttered something about checking with the coordinator before slipping out again, her face pale. As the door swung shut, I exhaled slowly, my hands gripping the edge of the table. That was the breaking point. Not her words, not her pity, but the simple truth they revealed. Even the people outside who weren't part of the inner circle could see the cruelty of it. And I realized something crystal clear. I had allowed myself to stay quiet for far too long. My brother thought I would take it, like I always had. My parents probably assumed the same. Sit quietly. Swallow the insult. Go home later, cry a little, and then show up at the next family gathering as though nothing had happened. But not this time. This time, the kitchen seat wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration. And my response was about to be one too. I straightened, smoothing the fabric of my dress, and my reflection caught in the chrome of a nearby refrigerator door. My eyes looked different, harder, sharper. Not defeated. Determined. The staff around me kept moving, but I felt like the entire room had slowed. Every clang of a pot, every hiss of a pan sounded distant, as though I were stepping into a different world, one where I no longer accepted invisibility. The kitchen seat had done more than humiliate me. It had lit the match. And now, all that remained was deciding what I would do with the fire. I sat there, hands flat against the cool metal of the table, staring at my reflection in the refrigerator door. The eyes looking back at me weren't the same ones that had walked into this wedding earlier that day. These eyes were sharper, alive with something that burned deeper than anger. It was clarity. My pulse steadied. I wasn't trembling anymore. The decision had been made the moment I whispered, "Not anymore." My purse rested on the chair beside me, its black leather faintly scuffed at the corners. Inside it, tucked neatly between my wallet and compact, was the binder I always carried for large events, a folder with the signed contracts, emergency contacts, and backup menus. It was my lifeline as a businesswoman. To most people, it was just paper. But to me, it was leverage. I reached for it slowly, like I was touching something sacred. When my fingers brushed against the zipper, the sound was almost drowned by the clatter of dishes and the roar of laughter from the reception hall. Almost. I pulled out the folder and laid it flat in front of me. The pages looked harmless, their black ink crisp against ivory paper, but I knew what they represented. The wedding wasn't just a family event, it was a business deal. My company was the official caterer, and without us, their picture-perfect reception would collapse into chaos. And here I was, their own blood, shoved into the shadows. I flipped to the final page, where my brother's signature sat above mine. It looked smug now, almost mocking. My chest tightened. A busboy walked past, glanced at the open folder, and raised a brow. "That looks serious," he said lightly, then moved on, not waiting for my response. Serious didn't even begin to cover it. I took a breath and reached into the side pocket of my purse for a pen. The metallic click echoed louder in my ears than the entire kitchen's noise. My hand hovered over the page, the weight of the moment settling deep in my chest. Was I really going to do this? My brother's laugh rang out from the other room, carried through the thin walls, as though mocking me again. That sound sealed it. "Yes," I whispered under my breath. I drew a steady line through the signature, crisp and final, and then another, slashing through the neat perfection of the page. With the same deliberate calm, I wrote in bold letters across the contract, "Void." The pen dug into the paper with such force that the impression bled through the back of the page. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was release. A quiet storm breaking free after years of silence. I slid the pen back into my purse and stared at the paper. It looked different now, heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of everything I had swallowed over the years. My breathing slowed, but my chest felt lighter than it had all night. The door to the kitchen swung open again. And this time it was one of the wedding planners, clipboard in hand, her heels clicking sharply on the tile. "Lily, could you check with your team about the timing for the next course? The bride wants." Her words trailed off when she noticed the folder in front of me. Her eyes flicked to the bold black letters on the page. She froze. "Is that?" she started. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice calm, almost cold. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She looked torn between professionalism and shock. I closed the folder gently, as if nothing monumental had happened. "Tell them," I said, my tone deliberate, "that the caterer is no longer under contract." The silence between us stretched for a long moment before she finally swallowed and gave a small, hesitant nod. Without another word, she turned on her heel and hurried back through the swinging door. The air in the kitchen shifted after that. The cooks exchanged glances. The dishwashers paused for half a beat before resuming their scrubbing. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. The tremor before the quake. I leaned back in my chair, pressing the folder flat with my palm. My heartbeat was steady now, my mind clear. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about respect. About finally saying out loud, in the only language they would understand, that I wasn't disposable. A chef approached cautiously, wiping his hands on his apron. "Ms. Lily," he said quietly, "do you want us to stop service?" The question hung in the air like a dare. I met his eyes and nodded once. "Yes." "Shut it down." His brows rose slightly, but he didn't argue. He simply gave a sharp whistle to his team. The kitchen slowed, then stopped altogether. Pots were set down, knives laid aside, Flames extinguished one by one. The silence that followed was almost eerie. For the first time all night, the kitchen was still. I sat in that silence, letting it sink in. The swinging door cracked open again, and the muffled sound of the reception grew louder. A bridesmaid peeked in, clearly flustered. They're asking why nothing's coming out? I tilted my head slightly, my expression calm. Tell them to ask the groom, I said. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She quickly shut the door, her heels clicking as she scurried away. I couldn't see the reception from where I sat, but I could imagine it. The confusion spreading, the whispers starting, the realization dawning. Every plate, every glass, every detail they had taken for granted was about to unravel. And all it took was a pen stroke. The strangest thing was how quiet my mind felt. I thought I'd feel guilt, maybe panic. But there was none. Just calm, steady certainty. This was my silent strike. And it was only just beginning. The silence in the kitchen didn't last. Within minutes, the muted hum from the reception hall swelled into a buzz. Then a low roar. The music faltered, then stopped altogether, cut off mid-song as though the DJ himself was waiting for a cue. A chair scraped hard against the floor beyond the wall. Someone, maybe my mother, called out for calm, but calm was already gone. I stayed seated, my hand resting lightly on the folder as if it were an anchor. The air smelled faintly of roasted garlic and butter, but beneath it was the metallic tang of tension, sharp and heavy. My chest rose and fell slowly. The storm had arrived, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was drowning in it. The door swung open hard enough to rattle its hinges. My brother stormed in, his tie already loosened, his face flushed, not from champagne but from anger. What the hell did you do? His voice cracked through the kitchen like a whip. I didn't flinch. I simply looked up, meeting his eyes. I ended the contract. His jaw clenched, the muscle twitching as though it might break through skin. You're ruining everything. Do you realize how many people? I cut him off, my tone steady but firm. Do you realize how many years I've been invisible to you? To this family? You seated me in the kitchen like a stranger. He blinked, momentarily thrown off by the calm in my words. Then his face hardened again. This is my wedding, Lily. It's not about you. I let out a low laugh, the kind that isn't born of humor, but of exhaustion. It was never about me, was it? Not once. For a moment, the room felt like it had shrunk to just the two of us, his anger crashing against my resolve. But then behind him, shadows moved, guests peeking in, drawn by the confrontation. Faces I hadn't seen in years. Cousins, old neighbors, my uncle who always found a reason to belittle me at family gatherings. Their eyes widened as they took in the scene. And suddenly, I wasn't hidden anymore. I stood, the legs of the chair scraping against the tile, the sound loud enough to cut through the murmurs. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the sheer force of years finally spilling over. You shoved me aside tonight, I said, my voice rising with each word. But it's nothing new. I've been shoved aside my whole life. Forgotten at birthdays, left out of celebrations, dismissed at dinners. You treated me like I didn't matter. But here's the truth, without me, this night doesn't hold together. And I just proved it. A hush fell. Even the clatter of plates from the dishwashers had stopped. My words seemed to hang in the steam-filled air, heavy and undeniable. My brother's mouth opened, but no sound came. For once he had nothing to say. Then I turned. Slowly, deliberately, I walked past him and through the swinging door. The reception hall hit me like a wave, lights, flowers, silk-draped tables, and a sea of stunned faces. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forks froze mid-air. All eyes turned toward me. I had dreamed of being seen at family events, though never like this. Yet now, standing there, their stares didn't burn. They fueled me. The bride's mother rushed forward, her voice tight with forced calm. Lily, maybe we can talk about this privately? I shook my head, my expression even. No more private talks. No more whispers. I've been silent too long. From the corner of the room, I heard someone whisper, she canceled the catering. And the ripple of shock spread like wildfire. Guests craned their necks, whispering into ears, eyes darting between me and the head table where my brother stood frozen in the doorway. For once, I wasn't invisible. I was the center. I took a slow breath, letting my gaze sweep the room. You all see me now, don't you? Maybe not as the perfect sister, maybe not as the one who always blends into the background, but you see me. There was no applause, no dramatic outcry. Just silence. Heavy, thick silence. But in that quiet, I felt something shift inside me. The little girl who once waited at the edge of the dance floor, hoping to be noticed, was finally gone. In her place stood a woman who didn't need their approval to exist. I turned toward the exit, my heels tapping against the hardwood, each step echoing louder than the music ever had. No one stopped me. They just watched. Halfway to the door, I caught sight of my father. He sat stiffly at his table, his glass of wine untouched, his eyes following me. For a second, just a second, his expression softened, something like regret flickering across his features. But I didn't stop. The night air hit me as I stepped outside, cool against my flushed skin. The muffled chaos from inside followed me, but it grew fainter with each step I took across the gravel path. The sky was clear, stars scattered like tiny witnesses overhead. I reached my car, my keys cool in my hand. As I opened the door, I paused, glancing back at the building glowing with golden light. For years, I had ached for a place inside those walls, a place at that table. But tonight had shown me something far more important. I didn't need their seat. I had made my own. Sliding into the driver's seat, I started the engine. The hum was steady, grounding. I gripped the wheel and whispered to myself, I'm seen. At last. And with that, I drove away, not as the forgotten sibling, not as the shadow in the corner, but as a woman who had finally stepped into her own light.